After I sold my last company, a handful of people came up to me and said, I didn't know you could sell a company like yours. I get it. Nobody talks about this stuff. Everyone talks about building a business, getting clients, growing revenue, but the exit, the actual mechanics of what it looks like to sell your agency or services company for real money, that often stays behind closed doors. See, I sold Lemonly in January 2021. We were a 7-figure infographic and data visualization agency right here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now, start to finish, the whole process took about a year. We had an awesome outcome, but I also made some mistakes. I learned things I wish I'd known 5 years earlier. And today, I'm going to give you all of it. The real questions buyers are going to ask, the numbers that determine your multiple, and what you need to build right now, whether you're selling in 2 years or 10, to have a business worth buying. Let's get into it. I'm breaking this into 3 parts. Part 1, the actual questions a buyer or an M&A advisor is going to ask you straight from the playbook of someone who's actually led over 200 transactions. Part 2, the numbers that matter and what good actually looks like. And part 3, what you need to do right now to get ready. Part 1, the questions a buyer will actually ask you. Here's something I wish I had before I started the process. A preview of what the first conversation with an M&A advisor or a potential buyer might actually look like. See, I came across an article by a man named David C. Baker. He's one of the leading authorities on selling agencies and professional service firms. He's guided over 200 transactions. He laid out the questions his team asks every single seller who comes to them. I want to walk you through the most important ones because they're the same questions that I was asked. And they're the same questions you need to have ready to answer. How big is your firm and where is your team working from? So size and location. These are the first 2. Buyers want headcount, but what they really want is total revenue. And they want to know if your team is in one place building something special together or spread out across time zones with nothing holding them together but a Slack channel. I'll say this, remote can look great on paper, lower overhead, leaner operations, but a buyer is also thinking, what happens to the team when the CEO walks out the door? Is there a culture here or is it just a bunch of contractors? How many partners and what are the ownership stakes? See, the fewer partners, the easier the deal. More partners means more people to get on the same page, more competing interest, more complexity. If you have multiple partners, this is a conversation to have now before you're sitting across from the buyer. What's your top line revenue and what's your profit? Here's where it gets real. And I want to say something important about this. See, Baker makes the point that most sellers don't actually know what is your EBITDA. They might know their profit, but EBITDA is slightly different. It stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And in many cases, your EBITDA is actually higher than what your profit is. So why does that matter? Because your valuation is going to be a multiple of that number. And whether the resulting EBITDA crosses certain thresholds like $1 million, it could affect what kind of multiple you can command. So know your numbers. Make sure you get a CPA in the room before you ever get on the phone with a buyer. What do the last few years look like? So here they're going to look for trend lines, not just where you are today, but where you've been and where you're going. See, a good M&A advisor is going to help you craft the narrative around this. But if there are a few years you need to explain, a big dip, a lost client, a weird COVID year, then you got to have your story ready. Buyers aren't just buying a snapshot, they're buying a trajectory. And so you want to go into a sale with a couple good years back to back to back in a row. How essential are you to the daily operations of the firm? This is the one that catches most owners off guard. We're going to come back to it in part 3 because your answer to this question determines more about your deal than almost anything else. Stay tuned. What does your client concentration look like? See, Baker's recommendation here is that your single largest client or related clients should represent less than 25% of your revenue. Buyers are looking for something maybe even tighter than that, closer to 10 or 15%. Now, why? Because a buyer's buying future revenue. And if 40% of your revenue walks out the door when one client leaves, they've got a problem. We had a time in my last company where there was a year where one client represented 50% of our revenue. So over the years, we started to dilute that by growing other clients and making sure no client got bigger than 15%. How do you land new clients? This is the question that reveals everything because a buyer isn't just buying what you've built, they're buying what you can continue to keep building. And if your answer is anything close to, well, we've been really lucky with referrals and word of mouth, that's a red flag. Buyers want a process, a repeatable, scalable system for filling the top of the funnel that doesn't just depend on your personal network or your relationships. So if you don't have one of these, build one now before you ever think about selling. All right, part 2, the numbers. What does good actually look like? Now let me give you the real benchmarks, because see, most people selling their company have no idea where they stand. Profit margin. When I was getting ready to sell Lemonly, I talked to a guy who specialized in agency mergers and acquisitions. We didn't end up working with him, but he gave me a ton of value over the phone. I remember he said this: 15% profit is fine, 20% good. If you're 25 or more, is great. See, Baker puts the EBITDA range for a sellable firm somewhere between 20 and 45%. So below 20%, you better have a really good story as why you should get bought. Above 45%, buyers might get suspicious and start wondering what you're hiding. So know your numbers, make sure it's moving in the right direction before you go to market. Your multiple. Your valuation is going to come as a multiple of EBITDA. So for most agencies and services companies, that's somewhere between 3 to 5x range often. It could be more if you land a strategic buyer, someone who really wants your position, your team, your service, or maybe your client list for reasons beyond just the financials. But whether you land at a 3x or a 5x depends on everything we've been talking about: your client loyalty, team stability, how you get new business, and how essential you are to the operations, and the strength of your positioning in the market. Revenue per employee. This is a metric I watched really closely at Lemonly. Not just total headcount and not just total revenue, but revenue per employee. Because growing your team can be easy, but growing profitably is hard. I've watched agencies add 3, 4, 5 people just to chase a big contract and then watch their margins shrink. So more revenue and less money in your pocket. Now that's a trap. Client mix. At Lemonly, by the end of every year, about 70% of our revenue was repeat customers. 25% was new business coming to us, and about 5% was outbound business that we went and got. Now, we were almost entirely a project-based shop. We didn't have 12-month contracts or retainers. But that 70% repeat number still told a buyer everything they wanted to hear. These clients aren't just staying because of a contract. They're staying because the work is good. The more repeatable business, retainers, long-term contracts that you can have, the better. Part 3, what do you need to build right now? So these are the things you need to start thinking about if you ever want to sell your company. And guess what? I tell all the CEOs that I coach that you should build your company to sell, even if you don't want to sell, because that means it's a good company. Number 1, the paradox. You have to be valuable, but replaceable. So you have to walk into the room. This was the hardest part when I sold, and convince the buyer that you built something brilliant and that you're super smart and that it'll be just fine without you. If the business is too dependent on you, the buyer has a problem. What happens to clients when you leave? Does the team fall apart? See, Baker's team will ask you directly, how essential are you to the daily running of the firm? And there's only one right answer to that question, and it's not very. The way I solved this at Lemonly was EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. We started running this actually back in 2018, about 3 years before we ever sold. And what it did was give my leadership team real ownership. They ran their departments, they made their decisions, and they built systems. They stopped waiting for me. See, I didn't know it at the time, but EOS was honestly making me less important. And that was the best thing that could ever happen. I often say we likely would not have sold the company if we hadn't implemented EOS. So start now. Build your leadership team that can run without you. Document how your business works. Create what I used to call a How Lemonly Works playbook. Document how you acquire clients, how you scope and deliver your project, what each role in the company does, how you stay profitable on every job. A buyer should be able to read that document and understand your business without ever talking to you. Number 2, start thinking about it earlier than you think. I remember hearing one time that you should start thinking about selling your agency 5 years before you do. That's great if you're able to do that. That was a little bit too long for me. I started thinking about it probably 2 years before we sold. But I now realize that a lot of the decisions we were making 3 and 4 years before actually set us up. So EOS in 2018, hiring a great salesperson in 2016, building the leadership team, tightening the client mix, all of it together helped us sell. So if you're going to sell, you might as well do it right. The decisions you make now determine the number you get then. Number 3, what you can't put a number on still matters. People told me after the sale, I didn't know you could sell a company like yours. And here's what I want every service business owner watching to take away. You can sell anything if it's valuable. So the quantifiable stuff is obvious. Your EBITDA, your revenue, your client count, your profit margin, all that matters, and buyers will scrutinize every metric. But the things that are harder to put a dollar on, your brand, your reputation, your culture, your team, your quality of work, the uniqueness of your positioning. A buyer could end up paying 5x EBITDA instead of 4, and they're willing to pay that premium because they believe what you built and believe it will keep going after you're gone. So build those things very intentionally. Be super strategic because they will show up in the multiple. All right, so here's the full picture. The questions buyers will ask: the firm size, team structure, partnership breakdown, revenue and profit, trend lines, client concentration, how you land new business, and how dependent that company is on you personally. The numbers you need to know: your EBITDA, profit margin of 20 to 45%, target range, 3 to 5x typical multiple, and keep that client concentration under 25%, and build a clear, repeatable new business system. What to build right now: a leadership team that doesn't need you, documented systems that capture how the business runs, a client base that proves loyalty without a contract, and a new business engine that buyers can scale. And lastly, the mindset: build a business you can sell, even if you never want to sell, because that is a good business. All right, so here's the challenge. Imagine an M&A advisor calls you right now, a serious buyer. They call you tomorrow, and they're gonna ask you every question that I just walked through. What happens next? Do you know your EBITDA? Do you have a new business system that you can describe in 2 or 3 sentences? Is your top client under 25% of your revenue? And could your leadership team run the company for 6 months without you? Whatever the gaps are that come up in your answers, those aren't just exit problems. Those are problems that you can fix today. So drop a comment below. I want to know, what's the one thing you most need to work on before you could ever sell your company? I will read and respond to all of them. And if you're building an agency business and want more content like this, hit subscribe. This is exactly what I cover every other week: the real mechanics of building something worth owning.